The Logitech G920 is many people's first option when it comes to a casual racing wheel. As someone who's owned a G920 for almost 5 years, I thought I'd do a review on the G920. Although bear in mind, it's pretty much the same as the G29 and G923, just with less buttons and some missing features. All currency will be Australian dollars, so feel free to load up a currency converter to whatever money your country uses. Now, let's go! Just a quick disclaimer, I'm using a $100 and something wheel stand I found on eBay, as is evident by the flex, so I may not be experiencing the true potential of this wheel and pedal set. But I figure I'll just talk about my experience, since I can't imagine it being hugely different on something more rigid, although it would definitely be better with a proper cockpit. And I'll also be reviewing the Logitech shifter, although that review will be a bit condensed. Starting off with the positives, this is probably the cheapest wheel and pedal combo from a highly regarded brand, which would hopefully ensure it's going to be good, but don't worry, it is. Throw in the shifter and all up, it'll cost you about $500. Of course, the G923 is a bit more, $100 more expensive, but the G29 is the same price as the G920, while still working on PC, which is something to consider if you want more buttons and rev lights. And because I know someone's going to ask this, the reason I didn't get the G29 is because at the time of buying it, I only had an Xbox One. Just quickly before moving on, in terms of a wheel stand, it's really not necessary. I would suggest having a sturdy desk, but you can desk mount this wheel just fine. I just got my wheel stand because it gave me more of a realistic driving position. Anyway, onto the driving feel. The motors are gear driven, and you can very much feel that in any game. However, the force feedback in most of the simulators I play is pretty good. It'll give you at least a basis on how much grip you have and when you're running out. Effects like curb and going off track are also felt quite nicely. Now for the pedals. The throttle is light and easy to push, with the clutch being slightly more resistant, but both pedals are completely linear in feeling and have a nice natural resistance. Now the brake. Everyone's talking point on these pedals. Since this is the positive section, I'll try to focus on the good stuff about this pedal. It does actually feel a bit realistic, obviously, if you're thinking of a race car pedal with high brake pressure and therefore pedal resistance. Of course, it doesn't feel linear, and it's not, but it still manages to feel responsive, especially with the right in-game settings. Before we talk about the negatives, let's look at the shifter. The paddles on the wheel are actually pretty nice. They have a good click to them, and you can definitely feel when you've gone up or down a gear. They're not amazing, but they do their job pretty well. Anyways, onto the shifter. Straight away, this shifter is slightly let down by the fact that it is H pattern only, but I mean, it is kind of to be expected from a $90 shifter. In terms of how it feels, well, I can describe it in one word: vague. There is very little resistance and it has quite a short throw. However, it does have a nice springy feeling to it. You can really chuck it around and have fun driving a manual car. It's not hard to misshift, but to be honest, I haven't in quite a while. Well, there's not much more to be said about this shifter. It's meant to be your H-pattern shifter, and that's exactly what it is. Not much more, but not any less. Now onto the negatives. First of all, of course, this wheel is pretty gutless. It has 2.2 Newton meters of peak torque, and most of the time, you can tell that's the case. It is very good at combining near peak torque with lower forces to make the force feedback a little better and more linear, but it is still quite weak. This also means you don't really have much detail. Like I said, you have a basis of how much grip you have and such like that, but that's it, a basis. It doesn't really give you much more information. As for the pedals, there's not a whole lot of travel, they're pretty short and have small faces. The brake pedal has a few more problems. As mentioned before, it isn't exactly linear. Logitech designed the mapping to progressively give more input per distance when you get further down the travel. This means, say, 60% to 80% is a much shorter distance than 10% to 30%. This makes trail braking a bit difficult, especially since the resistance is not just a stiff spring or a load cell, but rather an actual piece of rubber they put on the inside of the spring to give more resistance. In terms of longevity, I had to replace my pedals under warranty because the throttle started doing odd things where it would flicker at 10 to 20% if I lifted off or even out of nowhere, and at full throttle it would flicker around as well, sometimes down to as low as 70%. I also replaced the wheel when I got the pedals replaced, but it didn't really have any problems at the time, so it might have lasted a bit longer. To conclude, this is still definitely a good choice if you want to get into sim racing, or even if you just want to try out Forza or anything like that with a wheel. It does what it's meant to do pretty well, and I wouldn't expect any more at this price point. Before I go, look out for a future video in which I compare a lap time on this setup to a lap time in a much better setup, which I will hopefully be getting in the near future. And aside from that, well, thanks for watching till the end. Bye bye.